1 hour of World War II facts to fall asleep to. Welcome to our channel. Before starting, please like and subscribe for more stories. The path to World War II was long and complex, shaped by a multitude of political, economic, and social factors that unfolded over decades. The war's origins are deeply rooted in the aftermath of World War I, the failures of diplomacy, the rise of authoritarian regimes, and the unresolved tensions that gripped the world throughout the interwar period. The aftermath of World War I, sowing the seeds of conflict. The end of World War I in 1918 brought a sense of relief to a war-weary world, but the peace that followed was fraught with contradictions and challenges. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, aimed to prevent future wars by imposing strict conditions on Germany, the perceived aggressor. However, instead of fostering long-term peace, the treaty sowed deep resentment among the German population. Under the treaty's terms, Germany lost significant territories, including Alsace-Lorraine to France and all its overseas colonies. It was forced to accept full responsibility for the war under the War Guilt Clause and pay exorbitant reparations that crippled its economy. These reparations, amounting to billions of dollars, placed an unbearable financial strain on the German state, leading to hyperinflation and widespread poverty during the 1920s. For many Germans, the treaty symbolized humiliation and injustice, fostering a desire for revenge. The economic struggles in Germany were compounded by the broader impact of the Great Depression in the 1930s. This global economic downturn devastated industries, created mass unemployment, and destabilized governments worldwide. In Germany, unemployment reached staggering levels, and many citizens turned to extreme political movements, such as the Nazi Party, which promised to restore national pride and economic stability. The rise of totalitarian regimes. While Germany grappled with the consequences of the Treaty of Versailles, other nations faced their own challenges. Italy, despite being on the victorious side in World War I, felt shortchanged by the peace agreements, as it failed to gain all the territories it had been promised. This sense of betrayal, coupled with economic struggles, fueled the rise of Benito Mussolini and his fascist party. Mussolini, who became prime minister in 1922, sought to restore Italy's glory by establishing a totalitarian regime that glorified nationalism and militarism. In Japan, a different but equally dangerous form of militarism was taking root. The Japanese economy had expanded during World War I, but the subsequent economic downturn and reliance on imported resources created vulnerabilities. To address these challenges, Japan pursued an aggressive expansionist policy, starting with the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. This act of aggression marked the beginning of Japan's imperial ambitions in Asia, which would later escalate into full-scale war. The Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, also played a significant role in the interwar period. Stalin's policies of rapid industrialization and collectivization aimed to modernize the Soviet economy, but they came at a tremendous human cost, including widespread famine and political purges. While the Soviet Union remained relatively isolated during this period, its growing power and ideological opposition to fascism would later make it a key player in World War II. The failures of diplomacy. One of the most critical factors in the lead-up to World War II was the failure of international institutions like the League of Nations to maintain peace. Established in 1920 as part of the Treaty of Versailles, the League was intended to resolve disputes and prevent conflicts through collective security and diplomacy. However, it lacked the authority and means to enforce its decisions. When Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931, and later when Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935, the League condemned these actions but failed to take effective measures to stop them. These failures emboldened aggressive nations and demonstrated the limitations of international cooperation at the time. The rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party in Germany was perhaps the most pivotal development, the prelude to World War II. Hitler's ascent to power in 1933 marked the beginning of a radical transformation in German society. He capitalized on public discontent with the Treaty of Versailles and the economic hardships caused by the Great Depression. Promising to restore Germany's former glory, Hitler pursued a nationalist agenda that emphasized racial purity, anti-Semitism, and territorial expansion. One of Hitler's early moves was the reoccupation of the Rhineland in 1936, a region that had been demilitarized under the Treaty of Versailles. This bold action violated the treaty and the Locarno Pact, but the lack of resistance from Britain and France encouraged Hitler to push further. His ambitions soon turned to Austria, which he annexed in 1938 in what became known as the Anschluss. This was followed by the Munich Agreement, where Britain and France, seeking to avoid war, allowed Germany to annex the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. This policy of appeasement, while intended to maintain peace, only emboldened Hitler. While Germany's actions in Europe garnered much attention, Stalin was carefully observing these developments. In August 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty that shocked the world. The pact included a secret protocol dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, with Poland being partitioned between the two powers. This agreement ensured that Germany could invade Poland without fear of Soviet intervention. On September 1, 1939, Germany launched its invasion of Poland, utilizing the blitzkrieg tactic of rapid, overwhelming force. This act of aggression prompted Britain and France to declare war on Germany 2 days later, officially beginning World War II. However, in the early months of the war, known as the Phony War, there was little active fighting in Western Europe, as both sides prepared for the larger conflict to come. While Europe braced for conflict, Japan continued its expansion in Asia. The Second Sino-Japanese War, which began in 1937, saw brutal campaigns, including the infamous Nanking Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians were killed. Japan's aggression was driven by its need for resources to sustain its empire, as well as its desire to establish dominance in the Pacific. These actions brought Japan into conflict with Western powers, particularly the United States, which imposed economic sanctions in response. By the end of the 1930s, the world was on the brink of war. The combination of unresolved grievances from World War I, economic instability, the rise of authoritarian regimes, and the failure of diplomacy created a volatile environment. The invasion of Poland marked the tipping point, but the events leading up to that moment illustrate the complex interplay of factors that set the stage for the most devastating conflict in human history. The term Blitzkrieg, meaning lightning war in German, became synonymous with Germany's early successes in World War II. This innovative military strategy revolutionized warfare by emphasizing speed, coordination, and surprise, allowing German forces to achieve rapid victories against seemingly formidable opponents. The origins, execution, and consequences of Blitzkrieg provide a fascinating insight into how it shaped the early years of the war. Blitzkrieg was not a completely novel concept. It evolved from military theories developed after World War I. The static trench warfare of the Great War had demonstrated the inefficiency of prolonged battles of attrition. Military thinkers across Europe, including British theorist J.F.C. Fuller and German strategist Heinz Guderian, envisioned a new form of warfare that relied on mobility, mechanization, and the integration of air and ground forces. For Germany, Blitzkrieg offered a practical solution to its strategic challenges. After World War I, the Treaty of Versailles limited the size of the German military, forcing it to prioritize quality over quantity. German military leaders recognized that they could not sustain a prolonged war against larger adversaries like France or the Soviet Union. Blitzkrieg provided a way to achieve swift, decisive victories before enemies could fully mobilize their resources. Blitzkrieg relied on several interconnected elements, each contributing to its effectiveness. Mechanized forces, tanks or panzer divisions, formed the backbone of Blitzkrieg. These armored vehicles, supported by motorized infantry, allowed for rapid advances across enemy territory. The panzers were designed for speed and firepower, capable of overwhelming traditional defensive positions. Air support. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, played a critical role in Blitzkrieg operations. Fighters and bombers provided close air support, targeting enemy positions, supply lines, and infrastructure. The use of dive bombers like the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka was particularly effective in demoralizing enemy troops. Coordination and communication. Blitzkrieg emphasized tight coordination between different branches of the military. Radio communication allowed commanders to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions, a significant advantage over adversaries who relied on slower methods of communication. Psychological impact. The speed and ferocity of Blitzkrieg created shock and confusion among enemy forces. This psychological dimension often led to the collapse of morale and resistance, forcing enemies to retreat or surrender. Encirclement and isolation. A hallmark of blitzkrieg was the tactic of encirclement. German forces would penetrate enemy lines, surround key units, and cut them off from reinforcements and supplies. This strategy minimized casualties and maximized the effectiveness of German forces. The invasion of Poland on September 1, 1939, marked the first major application of blitzkrieg. German forces, consisting of over 2,000 tanks and supported by the Luftwaffe, quickly overwhelmed Polish defenses. The strategy involved simultaneous attacks from multiple directions, disrupting Polish command and control. Within weeks, Poland was defeated, and its territory was divided between Germany and the Soviet Union under the terms of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Poland's defeat stunned the world. Traditional military planners had not anticipated the effectiveness of blitzkrieg, and the speed of Germany's victory left little time for intervention by Britain and France, who had declared war on Germany but did not take immediate action. Blitzkrieg's success in Poland set the stage for its use in Western Europe. In May 1940, Germany launched its invasion of Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, and France. The campaign began with a feint through Belgium and the Netherlands, drawing Allied forces away from the Ardennes Forest, a region believed to be impassable for large armies. However, the Germans exploited this perceived weakness, sending panzer divisions through the Ardennes and bypassing the heavily fortified Maginot Line. The result was catastrophic for the Allies. German forces advanced rapidly, encircling large numbers of French and British troops. The most famous example of this was the evacuation at Dunkirk, where over 330,000 Allied soldiers were rescued from encirclement in a remarkable naval effort. Despite this evacuation, France fell within 6 weeks, and German troops marched into Paris on June 14, 1940. The fall of France demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of blitzkrieg. It also highlighted the weaknesses of traditional defensive strategies, such as reliance on static fortifications like the Maginot Line. While blitzkrieg was highly effective in the early stages of the war, it was not without limitations. The strategy relied heavily on speed and surprise, which required well-maintained supply lines and favorable conditions. As German forces pushed deeper into enemy territory, maintaining these supply lines became increasingly difficult. In the invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa, in 1941, the limitations of blitzkrieg became apparent. The vast distances of the Soviet landscape, combined with harsh weather and fierce resistance, slowed German advances. The campaign stretched German resources to their limits, and the initial successes of blitzkrieg could not be sustained. The failure to capture key objectives like Moscow and the onset of the brutal Soviet winter marked the beginning of Germany's eventual decline. Another limitation was the dependence on oil and other resources. Germany's aggressive expansion was partly driven by the need to secure access to these resources, but shortages became a critical issue as the war progressed. Blitzkrieg left a profound legacy on modern warfare. Its emphasis on mobility, coordination, and integration of air and ground forces influenced military doctrines around the world. After World War II, many nations adopted elements of blitzkrieg in their own strategies, recognizing its effectiveness in achieving swift victories. However, blitzkrieg also highlighted the dangers of over-reliance on speed and surprise. Germany's initial successes fostered a sense of invincibility among its leadership, leading to strategic overreach and ultimately contributing to its defeat. For the soldiers and civilians caught in the path of blitzkrieg, the experience was often terrifying. The rapid advances of German forces left little time for organized resistance or evacuation, leading to widespread chaos. Civilians were displaced by the millions, and the psychological impact of seeing their countries fall so quickly to German forces cannot be overstated. The shock of blitzkrieg also had a lasting effect on the Allied powers. It forced them to reevaluate their military strategies and adapt to the new realities of modern warfare. The eventual development of counter-strategies, such as the use of combined arms and air superiority, played a crucial role in turning the tide of the war. The Battle of Britain was one of the most critical turning points of World War II, marking the first major military campaign fought entirely in the air. Taking place between July and October 1940, this battle pitted the Royal Air Force (RAF) against the German Luftwaffe in a struggle for air superiority over Britain. The outcome would determine whether Nazi Germany could proceed with its plans to invade Britain and cement its dominance over Western Europe. The strategic importance of the battle. By the summer of 1940, Germany had achieved remarkable success in its blitzkrieg campaigns, conquering Poland, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. With much of Europe under Axis control, Adolf Hitler turned his attention to Britain, the last remaining major Allied power in Western Europe. However, an amphibious invasion of Britain, codenamed Operation Sea Lion, required control of the skies to protect German forces crossing the English Channel. Without air superiority, such an invasion would be highly vulnerable to British naval and air counterattacks. The Battle of Britain was, therefore, not just a clash of air forces, but a battle for the survival of Britain itself. Churchill famously described it as a confrontation in which the whole fury and might of the enemy must very soon be turned on us, underscoring its existential stakes. The Luftwaffe's initial strategy. The Luftwaffe, commanded by Hermann Göring, began a campaign with a clear objective: destroy the RAF. The Germans believed that eliminating Britain's air defenses would force the British government to negotiate peace or allow a successful invasion. The Luftwaffe's strategy was divided into several phases. 1. Attacks on coastal targets, July 10 to August 12, 1940. The initial German raids focused on British shipping in the English Channel and coastal defenses. These attacks aimed to disrupt supply lines and test British air defenses. 2 airfields and radar stations, August 13 to September 6, 1940, known as Adlertag, Eagle Day. This phase involved direct attacks on RAF airfields, radar stations, and infrastructure. The goal was to cripple Britain's ability to defend its airspace. 3. The Blitz, September 7 to October 31, 1940. After failing to achieve decisive results against the RAF, the Luftwaffe shifted its focus to bombing British cities, particularly London. This phase, known as the Blitz, sought to break civilian morale and pressure the British government into surrendering. Britain's defenses. The role of the RAF. Despite being outnumbered, the RAF mounted a formidable defense. The backbone of Britain's air strategy was the integrated air defense system developed by Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding. This system combined radar technology, ground observation posts, and efficient communication networks to coordinate responses to German attacks. 1. Radar technology. Britain's chain-home radar system was a game-changer in the Battle of Britain. It allowed the RAF to detect incoming German aircraft while they were still over the English Channel, providing critical early warning. This gave British fighters the ability to intercept enemy planes before they reached their targets. 2 aircraft. The RAF relied primarily on 2 iconic fighter planes, the Supermarine Spitfire and the Hawker Hurricane. The Spitfire was faster and more maneuverable, while the Hurricane was rugged and easier to repair. Together, these aircraft proved highly effective against the Luftwaffe. 3. The pilots. RAF pilots, famously referred to as the Few by Winston Churchill, came from diverse backgrounds and nationalities, including volunteers from Poland, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States. Their bravery and skill were crucial in defending Britain during this critical period. The turning point: German mistakes and British resilience. The Luftwaffe initially achieved some success, damaging RAF airfields and aircraft. However, several key factors turned the tide in Britain's favor. 1. German underestimation of radar. The Luftwaffe failed to fully understand the importance of Britain's radar network. Although radar stations were targeted early in the campaign, the Germans did not persist in these attacks, allowing the RAF to maintain its early warning capability. 2. Overextension of German resources. The Luftwaffe underestimated the resilience of the RAF and overestimated its own ability to sustain prolonged operations. German aircraft, particularly the Messerschmitt Bf 109, had limited range, reducing their effectiveness in prolonged engagements over Britain. 3. The Blitz. The decision to shift focus from RAF airfields to bombing British cities was a strategic error. While the Blitz caused immense destruction and loss of life, it allowed the RAF to recover, repair airfields, and regroup. 4. British morale and leadership. The British government, led by Winston Churchill, successfully rallied public support and maintained morale. Churchill's speeches, including his famous declaration that never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few, inspired both the military and civilians to endure. The outcome of the battle. By late October 1940, the Luftwaffe's campaign had failed to achieve its objectives. The RAF maintained control of British airspace, forcing Hitler to postpone and eventually abandon Operation Sea Lion. This marked Germany's first major defeat of the war and proved that the Axis powers were not invincible. The Battle of Britain had several far-reaching consequences. 1. A turning point in the war. Britain's victory in the battle preserved it as a base for future Allied operations, including the eventual D-Day invasion in 1944. It also demonstrated that Germany could be resisted, boosting Allied morale. 2. Increased American support. The resilience shown by Britain during the battle strengthened ties with the United States. American aid, provided through the Lend-Lease Act, became a lifeline for Britain in the years that followed. 3. Technological advancements. The battle highlighted the importance of air power and radar technology, shaping military strategies for the rest of the war and beyond. The human cost and legacy. The Battle of Britain came at a significant cost. Over 500 RAF pilots lost their lives, and thousands of civilians were killed during the Blitz. British cities, including London, Coventry, and Liverpool, suffered extensive damage. Despite this, the British people remained defiant, embodying the spirit of resistance that would define the Allied effort throughout the war. The battle's legacy endures as a symbol of courage and determination. Monuments, museums, and annual commemorations honor the few and the civilians who endured the trials of this pivotal moment in history. The Eastern Front of World War II, spanning from 1941 to 1945, was the largest and deadliest theater of the conflict. It was here, across the vast expanse of Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, that the war reached its most brutal dimensions. The battles on the Eastern Front accounted for the majority of military and civilian casualties during the war and ultimately determined the fate of Nazi Germany. The Eastern Front was initiated by Operation Barbarossa, Germany's massive invasion of the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941. Adolf Hitler viewed the Soviet Union as both an ideological and strategic enemy. Nazi ideology framed communism as a mortal threat to the German race, and Hitler sought to eradicate it. He also aimed to secure Lebensraum, living space, for the German people in the fertile lands of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa was the largest military operation in history in terms of manpower and casualties. Over 3 million Axis troops, supported by thousands of tanks, aircraft, and artillery pieces, crossed the Soviet border in a coordinated assault. The Germans initially divided their forces into 3 army groups. Army Group North, tasked with capturing Leningrad, modern-day St. Petersburg. Army Group Center, aiming to seize Moscow, the Soviet capital. Army Group South, targeting Ukraine and the oil-rich Caucasus. The invasion caught the Soviet Union by surprise. Despite intelligence warnings and the buildup of German forces along the border, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin refused to believe an attack was imminent. This hesitation allowed the Germans to achieve significant early successes, advancing hundreds of miles into Soviet territory and encircling vast numbers of Soviet troops. The initial phase of Operation Barbarossa saw staggering losses for the Soviet Union. Entire Soviet divisions were destroyed, with hundreds of thousands of soldiers killed or captured. Key cities such as Minsk, Smolensk, and Kiev fell to the advancing Germans. The Luftwaffe dominated the skies, destroying much of the Soviet Air Force on the ground during the first days of the campaign. The Germans' blitzkrieg tactics, which had proven so effective in Western Europe, worked initially against the Soviets. German forces achieved rapid breakthroughs and surrounded Soviet armies in massive pockets. The most notable encirclement occurred at Kiev, where over 600,000 Soviet soldiers were captured in a single operation. Despite these devastating losses, the Soviet Union was far from defeated. Stalin ordered a policy of scorched earth, instructing Soviet forces and civilians to destroy infrastructure, crops, and resources as they retreated. This policy denied the Germans vital supplies and made their advance more difficult. The Soviet government also undertook a massive effort to mobilize its population and industry. Factories were dismantled and transported east, beyond the reach of the German advance, and reassembled in the Ural Mountains, Siberia, and Central Asia. These relocated factories produced tanks, aircraft, and other war materials at an astonishing rate, enabling the Soviet Union to sustain its war effort. As the Germans pushed toward Moscow in the autumn of 1941, they faced increasing resistance. The Red Army, though battered, regrouped and launched counterattacks. The arrival of winter proved disastrous for the Germans, who were unprepared for the harsh conditions. Temperatures plummeted, and German troops lacked adequate clothing, vehicles, and supplies to withstand the cold. The Battle of Moscow, which began in October 1941, marked the first major defeat of the German army in World War II. Soviet forces, bolstered by reinforcements from Siberia, launched a counteroffensive in December, pushing the Germans back from the outskirts of Moscow. Hitler's dream of a quick victory in the east had been shattered. While the Germans failed to capture Moscow, Army Group North laid siege to Leningrad. The Siege of Leningrad, lasting from September 1941 to January 1944, became one of the most harrowing episodes of the war. The city's population endured nearly 900 days of starvation, bombardment, and extreme suffering. Over 1 million civilians perished, yet the city never surrendered. The Battle of Stalingrad, August 1942 to February 1943, was a pivotal moment in the war. Located on the Volga River, Stalingrad was a key industrial city and a strategic gateway to the Caucasus oil fields. Hitler ordered his forces to capture the city, while Stalin commanded that it be defended at all costs. The battle devolved into a brutal, close-quarters struggle. Urban combat in the ruined streets, factories, and buildings of Stalingrad took a horrific toll on both sides. The German Sixth Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, became bogged down in the city as Soviet forces launched a massive counteroffensive Operation Uranus in November 1942. This operation encircled the German forces in Stalingrad, cutting off their supply lines. Despite Hitler's orders to hold their ground, the encircled Germans were eventually forced to surrender in February 1943. The defeat at Stalingrad marked the beginning of a sustained Soviet advance westward and was a devastating blow to German morale and military capability. The Eastern Front was characterized by its unprecedented scale and brutality. Entire cities were destroyed, and civilian populations suffered immense hardships. The German occupation of Soviet territories was marked by widespread atrocities, including massacres, forced labor, and the implementation of the Holocaust. The Soviet Union also employed harsh tactics, including punitive measures against its own soldiers and civilians. Stalin's infamous Order No. 227, issued in 1942, declared that retreat without orders was punishable by death. The slogan, "Not a step back," became a grim reminder of the stakes involved. Following the victory at Stalingrad, Soviet forces launched a series of offensives that pushed the Germans back. The Battle of Kursk in July 1943, the largest tank battle in history, was another decisive Soviet victory. By 1944, the Red Army had liberated much of Soviet territory and was advancing into Eastern Europe. The final phase of the Eastern Front saw the Soviets capture key cities such as Warsaw, Budapest, and Vienna. In April 1945, Soviet forces launched the Battle of Berlin, culminating in the fall of the German capital and the suicide of Adolf Hitler. Germany's unconditional surrender followed on May 7, 1945. The Eastern Front was the deadliest theater of World War II, with an estimated 30 million people killed, including soldiers and civilians. The destruction of entire cities, the mass deportations, and the immense suffering of civilians left a lasting scar on the region. The Soviet victory on the Eastern Front played a decisive role in the defeat of Nazi Germany. It demonstrated the resilience of the Soviet people and the effectiveness of their industrial and military mobilization. However, the war also left the Soviet Union devastated, with vast areas of the country in ruins. The Pacific theater of World War II was vast, spanning millions of square miles of ocean and numerous islands, and encompassing some of the war's most brutal and strategically significant battles. Unlike the European theater, which involved land campaigns across large continents, the Pacific conflict was defined by naval warfare, island battles, and the determination of two powerful nations, Japan and the United States, to achieve dominance in the region. The roots of the Pacific War can be traced back to Japan's imperial ambitions in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Following the Meiji Restoration, Japan sought to expand its territory and influence, establishing itself as a major power in Asia. Its victory in the Russo-Japanese War 1904 to 1905 solidified its status, and by the 1930s, Japan had embarked on a campaign of aggression to secure resources and territory. In 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo. This marked the beginning of Japan's imperial expansion on the Asian mainland. In 1937, Japan escalated its aggression with the Second Sino-Japanese War, which included atrocities like the Nanking Massacre, where hundreds of thousands of Chinese civilians were killed. Japan's ambitions, however, extended beyond China. It sought to dominate the Pacific and Southeast Asia, targeting territories rich in resources such as oil, rubber, and tin. Japan's aggressive policies brought it into conflict with Western powers, particularly the United States. In response to Japan's invasion of French Indochina in 1940, the U.S. imposed economic sanctions, including an embargo on oil exports. This embargo threatened Japan's ability to sustain its military operations, leading its leaders to plan an ambitious strike against the U.S. to neutralize its Pacific fleet. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, a U.S. naval base in Hawaii. The attack aimed to cripple the U.S. Pacific Fleet and prevent it from interfering with Japan's expansionist plans. Over 350 Japanese aircraft bombed the base, destroying or damaging 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, and nearly 200 aircraft. More than 2,400 Americans were killed. While the attack achieved tactical success, it failed to deliver a decisive blow. Key assets, including U.S. aircraft carriers, were not present at Pearl Harbor during the attack. More importantly, the attack galvanized American public opinion, leading the United States to declare war on Japan the following day. Germany and Italy, Japan's allies, declared war on the U.S. shortly thereafter, bringing America fully into World War II. In the months following Pearl Harbor, Japan achieved a series of stunning victories. It captured the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, Hong Kong, and the Dutch East Indies. These victories gave Japan control over vast territories and critical resources. The capture of Singapore in February 1942, in particular, was a major blow to British prestige, as it was considered an impregnable fortress. Japan's expansion, however, stretched its resources and military thin. The vast distances of the Pacific, combined with the logistical challenges of maintaining control over conquered territories, would eventually become a significant disadvantage. The turning point in the Pacific theater came in June 1942, at the Battle of Midway. Following its defeat at Pearl Harbor, the U.S. sought to rebuild its naval strength and strike back at Japan. Midway, a small atoll in the Central Pacific, became the site of a decisive confrontation. The U.S., having broken Japanese naval codes, was aware of Japan's plan to attack Midway. This intelligence allowed Admiral Chester Nimitz to prepare a trap. During the battle, U.S. carrier-based aircraft launched devastating strikes on the Japanese fleet, sinking 4 aircraft carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. These were the same carriers that had participated in the Pearl Harbor attack. The loss of these carriers and their experienced crews was a crippling blow to Japan's naval power. The Battle of Midway marked a turning point in the Pacific War, shifting the momentum in favor of the Allies. Following Midway, the United States adopted a strategy of island hopping to regain control of the Pacific. This involved bypassing heavily fortified Japanese positions and focusing on strategically important islands that could serve as bases for further advances. Key battles in this campaign included Guadalcanal, August 1942 to February 1943, the first major Allied offensive in the Pacific. The Battle of Guadalcanal marked the beginning of Japan's retreat. Fierce fighting on land, at sea, and in the air resulted in heavy losses for both sides, but the Allies ultimately secured the island. Tarawa, November 1943, the Battle of Tarawa highlighted the challenges of amphibious warfare. U.S. Marines faced intense Japanese resistance and heavy casualties, but eventually captured the island, demonstrating the effectiveness of the island-hopping strategy. Saipan, Guam, and Tinian, August 1944, The capture of these islands brought U.S. bombers within range of the Japanese home islands, enabling devastating air raids. Iwo Jima, February and March 1945, the iconic battle for Iwo Jima resulted in some of the fiercest fighting of the war. The island provided a critical base for U.S. bombers and became a symbol of American determination. Okinawa, April-June 1945, the Battle of Okinawa was the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. It demonstrated the ferocity of Japanese resistance and foreshadowed the potential cost of an invasion of Japan itself. Naval power was a defining feature of the Pacific theater. Aircraft carriers, in particular, became the centerpiece of naval warfare. Battles like the Coral Sea and Leyte Gulf underscored the importance of carrier-based aircraft in determining the outcome of naval engagements. Submarines also played a critical role, sinking Japanese merchant ships and crippling Japan's supply lines. As the war turned against Japan, its military resorted to increasingly desperate measures. One of the most infamous tactics was the use of kamikaze pilots, suicide attacks by aircraft loaded with explosives. Kamikaze strikes targeted U.S. ships during battles like Leyte Gulf and Okinawa, causing significant damage and casualties. These attacks reflected Japan's determination to fight to the bitter end, even as defeat became inevitable. By mid-1945, the Allies had gained control of the Pacific and were preparing for an invasion of Japan. However, the potential cost of such an invasion, both in terms of military and civilian casualties, led the U.S. to pursue an alternative strategy, the use of atomic weapons. On August 6, 1945, the U.S. dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, killing tens of thousands of people instantly and devastating the city. 3 days later, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki. The unprecedented destruction and the threat of further bombings compelled Japan to surrender. On September 2, 1945, Japan signed the Instrument of Surrender aboard the USS Missouri, bringing an end to World War II. World War II was a conflict that reshaped the world, and at its core, it was a war driven by technological innovation. Nations on both sides of the conflict raced to develop advanced weapons, vehicles, communication systems, and medical technologies, each hoping to gain a decisive edge. The unprecedented scale and complexity of the war demanded breakthroughs in engineering, science, and logistics, many of which would transform not only warfare but also civilian life in the years to come. One of the most transformative aspects of World War II technology was the rapid development and deployment of air power. Aircraft, which had played a relatively minor role in World War I, became central to both strategy and tactics during World War II. Fighter aircraft, fighter planes like the British Supermarine Spitfire and the German Messerschmitt Bf 109 became icons of aerial combat. These planes were fast, maneuverable, and armed with powerful machine guns or cannons, making them essential for securing air superiority. Bombers. Strategic bombing campaigns relied heavily on long-range bombers such as the American B-17 Flying Fortress and the British Avro Lancaster. These planes could deliver devastating payloads to enemy cities and industrial centers, aiming to cripple their war economies. The German Heinkel He-111 and Japanese Mitsubishi G4M also played significant roles in Axis bombing campaigns. Jet engines. The war saw the introduction of jet-powered aircraft, a revolutionary development. The German Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, offered incredible speed and firepower but was introduced too late to change the war's outcome. Airborne radar. Radar technology revolutionized aerial combat and defense. British radar systems were instrumental in detecting incoming Luftwaffe raids during the Battle of Britain, giving the Royal Air Force the critical advantage of early warning. Naval warfare underwent significant changes during World War II, driven by advances in ship design, weaponry, and tactics. The traditional dominance of battleships gave way to the rising importance of aircraft carriers and submarines. Aircraft carriers. Aircraft carriers became the centerpiece of naval power, particularly in the Pacific theater. Battles such as Midway and the Coral Sea demonstrated the carrier's ability to project air power far beyond the range of traditional battleships. Submarines. Submarines played a crucial role in disrupting supply lines. German U-boats were central to the Battle of the Atlantic, where they targeted Allied shipping in an effort to starve Britain into submission. Allied advancements in sonar and depth charges eventually turned the tide against the U-boat menace. Naval radar systems installed on ships enhanced their ability to detect enemy vessels and aircraft, even in poor visibility. This technology significantly improved fleet coordination and defense. Amphibious operations, the development of specialized landing craft, such as the American Higgins boat, made large-scale amphibious operations like D-Day possible. These vessels allowed troops and equipment to be deployed directly onto hostile beaches. The war saw a dramatic evolution in the design and use of tanks and other armored vehicles. From the sweeping advances of German panzer divisions during the Blitzkrieg to the massive armored battles on the Eastern Front, tanks became a cornerstone of modern warfare. German innovations. The German Panzer IV and Tiger I tanks were renowned for their firepower and armor. The Tiger I in particular was nearly invulnerable to most Allied weapons, although it was expensive and difficult to produce. Soviet T-34. The Soviet T-34 was one of the most effective and influential tanks of the war. Its sloped armor, powerful gun, and ease of production allowed the Soviets to field vast numbers of these tanks, which proved decisive on the Eastern Front. Allied contributions. The American M4 Sherman was the workhorse of the Allied armored forces. While it was not as heavily armored or armed as some Axis tanks, its reliability and ease of production ensured its widespread use across multiple theaters. Perhaps the most dramatic technological development of the war was the creation of nuclear weapons under the U.S.-led Manhattan Project. This top-secret program brought together some of the greatest scientific minds of the era, including Albert Einstein and James Robert Oppenheimer, to develop an atomic bomb. The project culminated in the successful test of the first nuclear device in July 1945, followed by the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August. These bombings caused unprecedented destruction, killing tens of thousands instantly and forcing Japan to surrender. The advent of nuclear weapons not only ended the war, but also ushered in the nuclear age, fundamentally altering global geopolitics. Communication and intelligence. Advances in communication and intelligence played a crucial role in determining the outcome of the war. Cryptography, radio technology, and early computers were used to gain an edge on the battlefield. Code-breaking. Allied codebreakers achieved significant victories, most notably breaking Germany's Enigma cipher and Japan's Purple Code. At Bletchley Park in Britain, mathematicians and analysts, including Alan Turing, developed machines to decode encrypted messages, providing critical intelligence. Communication networks. Portable radios allowed for more effective coordination between units, particularly in mobile operations. The U.S. also used Navajo code talkers, who developed unbreakable codes based on the Navajo language. Propaganda and media. Advances in radio broadcasting and film allowed governments to influence public opinion and maintain morale. Propaganda played a central role in sustaining support for the war effort on the home front. Medical advancements. The war spurred significant advancements in medicine, driven by the need to treat wounded soldiers and prevent disease. Many of these innovations would have lasting benefits for civilian healthcare. Penicillin. The mass production of penicillin during the war marked the beginning of the antibiotic era. It saved countless lives by treating infections that would have otherwise been fatal. Blood transfusions. Advances in blood storage and transfusion techniques allowed for the development of blood banks, which became vital for treating battlefield injuries. Battlefield medicine. The use of mobile surgical hospitals or MASH units enabled doctors to provide life-saving care closer to the front lines. Prosthetics. The large number of wounded veterans led to advancements in prosthetics, improving mobility and quality of life for amputees. At the same time, the war demonstrated the double-edged nature of technology. While it enabled unprecedented levels of destruction, it also showcased humanity's capacity for ingenuity and adaptation. The lessons of World War II continue to shape military and technological development in the modern era. The Holocaust remains one of the darkest chapters in human history, representing the systematic persecution and genocide of 6 million Jews by Nazi Germany and its collaborators. Alongside the Jewish victims, millions of others, including Romani people, disabled individuals, Poles, Soviet prisoners of war, political dissidents, and LGBTQ+ individuals, were targeted in the Nazis' quest to create a racially pure society. Understanding the Holocaust requires examining its ideological roots, the machinery of genocide, the experiences of the victims, and the enduring impact on humanity. The roots of the Holocaust, Nazi ideology. The Holocaust was deeply rooted in the Nazi Party's ideology, which combined extreme nationalism, anti-Semitism, and racial purity theories. Adolf Hitler and his followers propagated the belief that Germans belonged to a master race, the Aryans, who were superior to all other groups. According to this ideology, Jews were deemed an existential threat to German society and were scapegoated for Germany's economic troubles, the defeat in World War I, and the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Anti-Semitism was not a new phenomenon in Europe, but under Nazi rule, it became institutionalized and radicalized. The Nazi regime passed a series of laws to marginalize Jews, beginning with the Nuremberg Laws of 1935, which stripped Jews of their citizenship and prohibited intermarriage between Jews and Aryans. These measures laid the groundwork for the exclusion and eventual extermination of Jewish communities. The persecution begins. When Hitler rose to power in 1933, persecution of Jews began almost immediately. Jewish businesses were boycotted, and Jews were expelled from civil service, schools, and universities. Public propaganda campaigns depicted Jews as subhuman, reinforcing societal prejudice and isolating Jewish communities further. The violence escalated with Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, on November 9 to 10, 1938. Nazi paramilitary forces destroyed Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues across Germany and Austria, killing at least 91 Jews and arresting over 30,000. This event marked a transition from economic and social oppression to outright physical violence. The outbreak of war and expansion of persecution. The outbreak of World War II in 1939 allowed the Nazis to expand their anti-Jewish policies into occupied territories. Following the invasion of Poland, Jewish populations were forced into overcrowded ghettos, such as those in Warsaw, Lodz, and Krakow. Ghettos were marked by horrific living conditions. Starvation, disease, and brutality were rampant. Entire families were crammed into small apartments with limited access to food, sanitation, or medical care. The invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, Operation Barbarossa, marked a significant escalation in the Nazi campaign against Jews. Mobile killing units known as Einsatzgruppen followed the German army into Soviet territory, conducting mass shootings of Jewish men, women, and children. These massacres often took place in forests or ravines, with victims forced to dig their own graves before being executed. The most infamous of these massacres occurred at Babi Yar, near Kiev, where over 33,000 Jews were killed in just 2 days. The final solution. In January 1942, senior Nazi officials met at the Wannsee Conference near Berlin to formalize the final solution to the Jewish question, a plan to systematically exterminate Europe's Jewish population. This marked the beginning of the Holocaust as an industrialized genocide, with death camps becoming the central mechanism of mass murder. The Nazis established 6 extermination camps in occupied Poland: Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Belzec, Sobibor, Chelmno, and Majdanek. These camps were equipped with gas chambers designed to kill large numbers of people quickly and efficiently. Victims were transported to these camps by train, often after enduring days or weeks of inhumane conditions in cattle cars. Upon arrival, most were immediately sent to the gas chambers, while a small number were selected for forced labor. The largest and most infamous camp, Auschwitz-Birkenau, became a symbol of the Holocaust. More than 1.1 million people were murdered there, the majority of them Jews. The process of extermination was systematic. Prisoners were stripped of their belongings, shaved, and tattooed with identification numbers. Those deemed unfit for work, including the elderly, pregnant women, and children, were killed immediately. Despite the overwhelming power of the Nazi machinery, acts of resistance and resilience emerged. In ghettos, underground movements organized revolts and smuggled weapons. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of April 1943 was a notable example, where Jewish fighters resisted deportations to extermination camps, holding off German forces for nearly a month. In the camps, resistance took the form of sabotage, escape attempts, and efforts to preserve human dignity. At Sobibor, a group of prisoners staged a revolt in 1943, killing guards and enabling hundreds to escape, though many were later recaptured. Others documented their experiences in secret diaries or buried written accounts to ensure that the atrocities would not be forgotten. As Allied forces advanced in 1944 and 1945, they began liberating concentration camps, uncovering the full extent of Nazi atrocities. Soldiers encountered emaciated survivors, piles of corpses, and evidence of systematic murder. The liberation of Auschwitz on January 27, 1945, by Soviet troops remains one of the most poignant moments in the history of the Holocaust. The survivors faced immense challenges in the aftermath of the war. Many had lost their entire families and had no homes to return to. Displaced persons camps were established to provide temporary shelter, but rebuilding lives after such trauma was an arduous process. The world's awareness of the Holocaust spurred the creation of international laws addressing genocide and crimes against humanity. The Nuremberg trials, held between 1945 and 1946, sought to bring Nazi leaders to justice. High-ranking officials such as Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, and Joachim von Ribbentrop were tried for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. While some were convicted and executed, others escaped justice, fleeing to South America or hiding in post-war Europe. The trials established important legal precedents, including the principle that individuals are responsible for their actions, even if they were following orders. They also underscored the need for international cooperation in preventing future atrocities. The Holocaust had profound and lasting effects on the world. It led to the establishment of the United Nations and the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The founding of the State of Israel in the same year provided a homeland for Jewish survivors, though it also introduced new geopolitical complexities. Education and remembrance became central to preventing future genocides. Memorials, museums, and documentaries serve to honor the victims and educate future generations about the consequences of hatred and prejudice. World War II was not only fought on battlefields, it was also waged on the home fronts of Allied nations. The war demanded an unprecedented level of mobilization, with civilians contributing to the war effort through labor, innovation, and sacrifice. From the factories of the United States to the ration lines in Britain and the resistance movements in occupied territories, the Allied home fronts were a vital element in the eventual victory. Total war, mobilizing economies. World War II was a total war, requiring the full mobilization of national economies to support the military effort. Factories, industries, and even farms were retooled to meet the demands of war. This economic transformation was especially evident in the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. 1. The United States, the arsenal of democracy. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the U.S. rapidly transitioned its economy to a war footing. Factories that once produced cars, appliances, and consumer goods were converted to produce tanks, aircraft, and ammunition. Major companies like Ford and General Motors shifted to manufacturing war materials. For example, Ford's Willow Run plant became famous for producing B-24 Liberator bombers, with one plane rolling off the assembly line every 63 minutes at its peak. The War Production Board, WPB, was established to oversee this transformation, ensuring that resources were allocated efficiently. Between 1940 and 1945, the U.S. produced over 300,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, and millions of rifles, vehicles, and ships. The U.S. also played a critical role in supplying its allies through the Lend-Lease Act, which provided weapons, vehicles, and supplies to countries like Britain, the Soviet Union, and China. 2. Britain, resilience and innovation. Britain faced immense challenges, particularly during the early years of the war, when it stood alone against Nazi Germany. Despite this, the British economy was transformed to support the war effort. Factories operated around the clock to produce aircraft, munitions, and ships. Women entered the workforce in large numbers, taking on roles traditionally reserved for men. The iconic image of Rosie the Riveter had its British counterpart in women working in factories and on farms. The Ministry of Supply coordinated the production of weapons and equipment, while the government implemented strict controls on resources through rationing. Britain's reliance on imported food and goods made the Battle of the Atlantic crucial. German U-boats targeted supply convoys, leading to shortages and the implementation of victory gardens, where civilians grew their own food to supplement rations. 3. The Soviet Union, industrial relocation and sacrifice. The Soviet Union faced extraordinary challenges after the German invasion in 1941. Many of its industrial centers were located in the western part of the country, which was quickly overrun by German forces. In response, the Soviets undertook a remarkable effort to relocate factories east of the Ural Mountains, beyond the reach of the German advance. Entire industrial plants were dismantled, transported by rail, and reassembled in record time. Despite immense hardships, including food shortages and harsh winters, Soviet workers produced vast quantities of tanks, aircraft, and ammunition. The T-34 tank, considered one of the best of the war, was mass-produced in these relocated factories. The role of women. World War II fundamentally changed the role of women in society. As millions of men joined the armed forces, women stepped into jobs traditionally held by men, proving their capability and resilience. 1. Industrial work. Women worked in factories, shipyards, and aircraft plants, performing jobs that were physically demanding and technically complex. In the U.S., the government launched propaganda campaigns to encourage women to join the workforce, leading to the creation of the Rosie the Riveter icon. 2. Military roles. Women also serve in the armed forces in non-combat roles. In Britain, the Auxiliary Territorial Service, ATS, allowed women to work as drivers, mechanics, and radar operators. In the U.S., the Women's Army Corps, WAC, and Women Air Force Service pilots, WASP, played similar roles. 3. Agriculture. Women took over farming duties through programs like Britain's Women's Land Army, ensuring that food production continued despite labor shortages. Rationing and conservation. Rationing became a common feature of life on the Allied home fronts. Governments implemented strict controls on food, fuel, and other essential goods to ensure that the military had the resources it needed. 1. Britain. Rationing in Britain began in 1940 and included staples like meat, butter, sugar, and tea. Civilians were issued ration books, and creative recipes were developed to make the most of limited ingredients. Clothing was also rationed, leading to the Make Do and Mend campaign, which encouraged people to repair and reuse their garments. 2. The United States. In the U.S., rationing began in 1942, covering items like gasoline, rubber, and coffee. Victory gardens became widespread, with millions of Americans growing their own vegetables to supplement food supplies. 3. The Soviet Union. Rationing in the Soviet Union was even more severe, as much of the country's agricultural production was disrupted by the war. Civilians endured harsh conditions, with bread and potatoes becoming staples of their diet. Propaganda and morale. Governments used propaganda to maintain morale and ensure public support for the war effort. Posters, films, and radio broadcasts emphasized themes of unity, sacrifice, and patriotism. 1. Posters and slogans. Posters encouraged civilians to conserve resources, buy war bonds, and support the troops. Slogans like "Loose lips sink ships" in the U.S. warned against careless talk that might aid the enemy. 2. Films and media. Hollywood and the British film industry produced movies that glorified the war effort and depicted the Allies as champions of freedom. Documentaries and newsreels brought images of the war to civilian audiences, fostering a sense of involvement and urgency. In occupied territories, civilians formed resistance movements to oppose Axis forces. These groups engaged in sabotage, intelligence gathering, and guerrilla warfare, often at great personal risk. 1. France. The French resistance played a vital role in gathering intelligence for the Allies and sabotaging German operations, particularly during the lead-up to D-Day. 2. Poland. The Polish Home Army carried out sabotage missions and participated in uprisings, such as the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. 3. Soviet partisans. Behind German lines, Soviet partisans disrupted supply lines, destroyed railways, and attacked German troops. The contributions of civilians on the home front had lasting effects on society. Women's participation in the workforce paved the way for greater gender equality, while the experience of shared sacrifice fostered a sense of unity and collective responsibility. The economic and industrial mobilization also set the stage for post-war reconstruction and prosperity. The fall of Nazi Germany marked the end of the European theater of World War II. The final stages of the war in Europe unfolded between 1944 and 1945, culminating in Germany's unconditional surrender in May 1945. This period was characterized by the relentless advance of Allied forces, the collapse of German defenses, and the catastrophic consequences for German cities, military, and civilians. The Allied advance in the West. The turning point for Germany came with the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944. The Allied invasion of Normandy marked the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. Over 156,000 troops from the United States, Britain, Canada, and other Allied nations stormed the beaches of Normandy, supported by a massive aerial and naval bombardment. Breakout from Normandy. Following weeks of intense fighting, the Allies broke out of the Normandy region and began their rapid advance through France. Paris was liberated on August 25, 1944, to widespread jubilation, symbolizing a significant blow to Nazi morale. The Battle of the Bulge. In December 1944, Germany launched a desperate counteroffensive in the Ardennes forest, known as the Battle of the Bulge. Despite initial successes, the offensive was repelled, depleting German resources and further weakening its military. By early 1945, Allied forces crossed the Rhine River and advanced into Germany itself. Cities such as Aachen, Cologne, and Frankfurt fell one by one as the Allies closed in on Berlin from the west. The Soviet advance in the east. While the Allies pushed from the west, the Soviet Red Army advanced from the east. Following their victory at Stalingrad and the subsequent successes at Kursk and beyond, Soviet forces launched a series of devastating offensives that pushed German forces out of Eastern Europe. Operation Bagration. In the summer of 1944, the Red Army launched Operation Bagration, a massive offensive that annihilated German Army Group Center and liberated much of Belarus. This operation paved the way for the Soviet advance into Poland and the Balkans. Liberation of Eastern Europe. By early 1945, the Soviets had liberated Warsaw, Budapest, and Vienna. Their relentless advance brought them to the Oder River, just 60 miles from Berlin, by April 1945. The collapse of the Third Reich. As Allied forces closed in from both east and west, the situation inside Germany became increasingly desperate. Hitler's refusal to negotiate or retreat ensured that German cities, infrastructure, and civilian populations bore the full brunt of the war. Bombing campaigns. Allied bombing campaigns intensified in late 1944 and early 1945, targeting German cities, factories, and transportation networks. Cities such as Dresden, Hamburg, and Berlin were subjected to firebombing raids, resulting in massive destruction and loss of life. Economic collapse. Germany's economy was in ruins. Factories ceased production, transportation networks were destroyed, and food shortages left civilians on the brink of starvation. Hitler's isolation. Hitler retreated to his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin, where he became increasingly detached from reality. He issued orders for non-existent armies and refused to consider surrender. The Battle of Berlin. The Battle of Berlin, fought in April and May 1945, was the final major battle of the European theater. Soviet forces launched a massive assault on the German capital, surrounding the city and engaging in fierce street-by-street fighting. Soviet strategy. The Red Army committed over 2.5 million troops to the assault, supported by thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft. Despite facing stiff resistance from German troops, including Hitler Youth and Volkssturm militia, the Soviets advanced inexorably. Hitler's death. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his bunker, along with his wife Eva Braun. His death symbolized the collapse of the Nazi regime. German surrender. Following Hitler's death, German forces continued to fight briefly but recognized the futility of further resistance. On May 7, 1945, German representatives signed an unconditional surrender in Reims, France, followed by a formal ceremony in Berlin on May 8. This day, celebrated as Victory in Europe Day, marked the official end of the war in Europe. The aftermath of Germany's fall. The fall of Germany left the country in ruins. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, and millions of civilians were displaced. The war claimed the lives of an estimated 7 million Germans, including soldiers and civilians. One division of Germany. At the Yalta and Potsdam conferences, the Allies agreed to divide Germany into 4 occupation zones controlled by the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France. Berlin, the capital, was similarly divided, setting the stage for the Cold War. Two war crimes trials. The Nuremberg trials held Nazi leaders accountable for crimes against humanity or crimes and genocide. These trials established precedents for international law and justice. 3. Rebuilding efforts. Post-war Germany underwent a process of demilitarization, denazification, and reconstruction. The Marshall Plan, implemented by the United States, provided economic aid to rebuild Western Europe, including West Germany. Legacy. The fall of Germany marked the end of Hitler's vision of a thousand-year Reich and highlighted the catastrophic consequences of unchecked militarism and authoritarianism. It also reshaped the global order, dividing Europe into spheres of influence and laying the foundation for decades of tension between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union. World War II left an indelible mark on human history, reshaping the global political landscape, economies, societies, and international relations. As the deadliest and most destructive conflict in history, its legacy continues to influence the modern world. From the establishment of international institutions to the Cold War and the cultural memory of the war, the effects of World War II are vast and multifaceted. The human cost. The scale of human loss in World War II was unprecedented. Estimates suggest that between 70 and 85 million people perished, including soldiers and civilians. The Holocaust alone claimed the lives of 6 million Jews and millions of other victims, including Romani people, disabled individuals, and political dissidents. Civilian suffering. Civilians bore much of the war's burden. Cities across Europe and Asia were bombed into ruins, and millions were displaced. The war created a global refugee crisis, with survivors of concentration camps, bombed-out cities, and occupied territories seeking safety. Generational trauma. The psychological scars of the war, particularly for survivors of atrocities like the Holocaust and the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, persisted for decades. These events shaped cultural narratives and national identities. Political and geopolitical shifts. World War II dramatically altered the global balance of power, ending the era of European dominance and ushering in the age of the superpowers. 1. The rise of the United States and the Soviet Union. The United States emerged from the war as a global superpower with unmatched economic and military strength. Its wartime production and technological advancements positioned it as a leader in the post-war world. The Soviet Union, having borne the brunt of the war in Europe, also rose to prominence, expanding its influence over Eastern Europe and establishing itself as a rival superpower to the U.S. 2. The decline of European empires. The war hastened the decline of colonial empires. European powers like Britain, France, and the Netherlands were economically weakened and faced growing demands for independence from their colonies. The process of decolonization accelerated after the war, leading to the independence of nations in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East throughout the mid-20th century. 3. The Cold War. The division of Germany and the ideological divide between the United States and the Soviet Union set the stage for the Cold War, a decades-long struggle for global influence. This period was marked by proxy wars, nuclear arms races, and political tension between capitalist and communist blocs. The creation of international institutions. The devastation of World War II underscored the need for international cooperation to prevent future conflicts. Several institutions were established in the aftermath of the war, many of which remain central to global governance today. 1. The United Nations. Founded in 1945, the United Nations aimed to promote peace, security, and international cooperation. Its creation was a direct response to the failures of the League of Nations and the need for a stronger mechanism to address global challenges. The UN Charter emphasized principles such as the sovereignty of nations, human rights, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. 2. Bretton Woods System. The Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 established institutions like the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank to stabilize the global economy and facilitate post-war reconstruction. These institutions laid the foundation for the modern economic order, fostering international trade and economic development. 3. Nuremberg Trials and International Law. The Nuremberg trials set important precedents for holding individuals accountable for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. These principles influenced the development of international criminal law and later tribunals, such as those for Rwanda and Yugoslavia. Technological and scientific advancements. World War II spurred significant advancements in science and technology, many of which had profound post-war applications. 1. Nuclear technology. The development of nuclear weapons under the Manhattan Project changed the nature of warfare and geopolitics. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki demonstrated the destructive potential of nuclear weapons, leading to efforts to control their proliferation through treaties like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT). Nuclear power also emerged as a source of energy, shaping post-war energy policies. 2. Radar and computers. Radar technology, developed for military use, became crucial in aviation, weather forecasting, and air traffic control. The war also accelerated the development of early computers, such as the British Colossus and the American ENIAC, which laid the groundwork for the modern computing revolution. 3. Medicine and health. Medical advances, including the mass production of penicillin and improvements in blood transfusion techniques, revolutionized healthcare. The war also led to the establishment of modern prosthetics and rehabilitation programs for injured veterans. Social and cultural transformations. The war brought significant changes to societies and cultures worldwide, many of which were shaped by the experiences of ordinary people during the conflict. 1. The role of women. Women's contributions to the war effort, both in the workforce and on the home front, challenged traditional gender roles and laid the groundwork for post-war movements for gender equality. In many countries, women gained the right to vote and greater access to education and employment opportunities. 2. Migration and urbanization. The war prompted massive migrations, including the displacement of millions of refugees and the movement of people to urban centers for war-related work. These shifts had lasting impacts on demographics and urban development. 3. Cultural memory. World War II became a central theme in literature, film, and art. Works like In Frank's Diary, movies like Saving Private Ryan, and memorials like the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., have kept the memory of the war alive for future generations. A world forever changed. The legacy of World War II is a testament to both the destructive power of war and the resilience of humanity. It reshaped the political, economic, and social structures of the world, setting the stage for the modern era. The lessons of the war, particularly the importance of international cooperation, the dangers of unchecked aggression, and the value of human rights, continue to resonate, reminding us of the need to strive for a more just and peaceful world.